Good evening, everybody. I've got Amethyst here. Good evening, everybody. I've got Amethyst here. He's a foster dog looking for his forever home. Sorry, the girl. Um, so a little story about Amethyst. She was dropped in a toad at a Dollar General when it was still snowing out there, and she's been in foster care for a while. So if anybody likes who she is, with anything like that, and are interested, you can look her up and submit an application for adoption. But I'll pass her off. So I'm Justin Turner. I'm running for District 4 council member, and welcome to the live show. Kind of tonight, I'm going to take a slightly different direction and kind of talk about the amendment number 2 on the ballot. I think it's while we do have important things to vote on for the city of St. George, we also have some constitutional amendments. So kind of with that, I'm going to pass that over to my producer to explain some of the instructions.
Well, everybody, good to have you. Justin, likewise, good having you. Congratulations on a greatly run campaign.
Thank you.
So as you guys know, for those of you that come on board, and for those of you that are on Facebook or YouTube, if you want to ask questions, let us know. In the Zoom, go ahead and put your click on Q&A, and we'll indicate to Justin that you have questions. And when we get to the question and answer session, it's live, open mic. You can indicate that you want the microphone, and we'll open up the mic, and you guys can have access to him in conversation. So without much delay, let's go ahead and get started. Jesse, you have the floor. Back to you.
All right, I appreciate it. So kind of with amendment number 2, essentially what's happening is it's a complete rewrite of this particular section in the Louisiana Constitution. And any change to the Louisiana Constitution automatically, once it gets through legislation, has to go to a vote of the entire state. So in order for there to be that amendment to take effect in the Constitution, it has to garner at least 50.1% of votes in favor. And kind of one of the things with amendment number 2 and why I'm opposed to it is this is a massive change. I believe the total is about 115 documents or 115 pages, and it encompasses massive changes that could have a pretty drastic effect on some of the different organizations and things like that in Louisiana. So one of the things that this amendment would do is it would remove the constitutional protection for nonprofits. And what that means is currently nonprofits, property tax exemptions are a constitutional right, which makes it extremely difficult for legislation to actually remove those protections. And what this does is it actually incorporates it into a Louisiana statute, which means as opposed to them ever having to go back to a vote of the state of Louisiana, they would only need a 2/3 vote in legislation to remove those protections. Another thing that's kind of in it, and it's a little bit misleading on kind of how it's structured, is currently in the Constitution there's an income tax rate max at 4.25%. What this amendment does is it lowers that maximum rate to 3.75, which can can be a benefit, but what you got to pay attention to on there is it also removes the requirement for federal taxes that are paid to be deducted from your income. So what's happening there is now you could be paying taxes on money that you're actually spending in federal taxes, to where right now those taxes are automatically deducted from the total income, and you're not taxed on those from the state level. Another thing kind of in it is this is actually something that I'm in favor of, but it's it's a little bit convoluted how it's structured, and it's removing the inventory tax, but it's not an outright removal of the inventory tax. It's an optional plan for parishes to opt out of it. So the way it works is if a city parish opts out of the inventory tax collection, they get paid a lump sum of 3 years of that tax up to I think it's up to $15 million. And what that does is it offers a little bit of a phase out of that inventory tax. And like I said, I'm all in favor of the removal of that inventory tax because I think that is something that that kind of hinders our our business growth effort. And if you don't know what inventory tax is, essentially the businesses pay taxes to the parishes on the inventory that they have in stock every year, and then they actually have to go back to the state to get those credits applied back for those taxes. So it's a little bit of a messy avenue, and essentially what they're doing is they're looking to remove that completely, and this is kind of a part one phase of phasing that out. And I think it's something that I would be supportive of if it wasn't for all of the additional changes and things like that that are actually within it. Um, Another part of that, it actually prohibits local government from granting any um, tax breaks or tax exemptions without an approval by state legislation. So it it's actually removing the local city's ability to negotiate with some of these manufacturers as far as providing tax exemptions in order to entice these businesses to, whether it's a an improvement project or the creation of a new business. um, that power is no longer in the city's hand. It's actually shifted into the state legislation. Um, and then the kind of the last point I have on it is it takes a lot of it takes some educational trust funds and uses those to pay down retirement debt for the Teachers Association. And one of the things that I've kind of heard it talk about was that this bill is encompassing raises for teachers. Well, it doesn't. There's no mandatory teachers raise within this amendment. What it's doing is they're generating an idea that if we take these trust funds they're actually trust funds that are utilized for technology improvements and infrastructure improvements and things like that for the educational system, and the money that's in it is being transferred into paying off debt on the teacher's retirement account. And the idea is that by paying that debt off, it alleviates some funding, but it kind of leaves it open ended to where, okay, now it's not a dedicated resource of this funding. It's going to be, okay, am I going to get an allocation of whatever savings this debt payment, kind of gives. So, kind of with that, I don't have anything else on, specifically on the amendment. So if we got any questions anybody has to, wants to ask, whether it's about constitutional amendments, St. George, home rule charter, anything like that, go ahead.
The
Got
one
anything?
question I have so far is why why is it getting so much traction to vote in favor of it when your typical conservatives could see right through this, or is it the fact that it has been lumped in with so many different things that are possibly good that is hard to distinguish what's good and
Mm.
bad in the amendment?
I think the big thing for that is when you read just the text, and the text that's actually going to be on the ballot is very misleading on exactly what's in it. While that text does incorporate some of the avenues in here, it's actually structured in a way to entice you to vote in favor of it. However, what the biggest problem in this is when you remove the protections of these nonprofits. Now you're going to have nonprofit organizations that are actually supplemental to a lot of the government, government services that we're unable to provide. So certain like humanitarian services and things like that, they're going to have to allocate a budget towards tax payments for property tax that they otherwise wouldn't have had to do. And kind of what happens with that is, in order for them to do that, they're going to have to reduce the services, which affects the overall community reach of these organizations. And that's the thing. So it's it's kind of misconvoluted. And when you talk about from the church aspect of it, the only protection that remains is for the actual church buildings. So, things like if you consider Healing Place Church that has a, a church like soccer and baseball programs and things like that, those are community services and community outreach programs that benefit everybody in the community because it doesn't, the minimum fee that it costs to put a kid in there is nothing compared to what the actual operational cost is. But what happens is now these baseball fields and these soccer fields and all these other areas associated with these churches are potentially going to be susceptible to property tax assessments, and it's going to affect them, and it's going to affect their ability to continue offering those community outreach programs, community services to the community.
And this, of course, this applies to churches, as
Mhm.
all types of nonprofit organizations.
Yeah, so it applies to church, not specifically the church buildings. I think they call it the house of worship, but it includes other, facilities or other properties within those church organizations, such as, a recreational field or park or something like that. Even though it's owned by the church, it's operated by the church, since it wouldn't be considered a house of worship, it could become, and it would have to go through to clarify, these protections would automatically fall under Louisiana statute. So they don't just go away. So if the vote passes, it's not like all these places are going to have to pay taxes day one. It actually goes to Louisiana statute, and what happens from there is if the state legislation decides they want to remove these exemptions from certain nonprofits or certain, you know, property assessments that are, however they choose to do it, it would still have to go through legislation to change the statute for it, but they would only require a two-thirds vote in the legislature, and as opposed to a state constitution. So it also is going to kind of require some of these nonprofits to essentially be involved in some of the lobbying efforts to the state legislation to kind of ensure that these property tax exemptions are still protected for them.
I have a question here. It's unrelated, but it's unrelated to this topic, but it's related to your podcast.
Mhm.
Somebody asked, is it better to share here or YouTube? Um, and so my take is if you're on Facebook and you're on the podcast on Facebook, go ahead and share it there in Facebook
Mhm.
and share it with your folks there. You good with that, Justin?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. And you can also you can go back to YouTube after and share the entire video as well. And Facebook, it's a little bit, if you share it and they come in during this session, I don't necessarily know how that works as far as how that's saved. But if you want to go back to the YouTube channel after the fact, and you can share the video directly from YouTube, and then people can watch it in there. They can be aware that it exists.
Yeah, YouTube will actually show about a minute worth of pre-recorded time. So you'll get a little bit behind the scenes. Whereas the
Mhm.
YouTube version starts about a minute or two after it's already started. But as far as sharing, either one's fine. Whatever you're comfortable
Yeah.
with, it's fine. All right, but back to the amendments. Um, so this isn't a question. This would be my comment to you is that if this does pass, churches will start worshiping outside in the baseball fields and call those a house of worship too, huh?
Yeah, they'll pop up some tents out there and start having worship services on the field.
That's right. That's right. All right. Another question is would you be comfortable sharing your thoughts on the other amendments, or would you rather not get into that?
I haven't done as much research into the other amendments, so I feel like it would be a disservice to anybody listening to for me to give my opinions on that because it doesn't have as much facts and data to back it up.
Okay. All right. And then another question regarding amendment number two is what are the good elements in that amendment that they're bundling all together?
Okay. Um, there's two of them in there that I know for certain that I actually like, and one of them is that inventory tax phase out essentially. And the reason for that is, like I said, the inventory tax is something that actually hinders a lot of business development and um, in our expansion for economic growth outside of what we already have. And phasing that out, and it's actually offering a path for the parish governments to kind of slowly lean off of that reliance of that tax, because it's something that's supplemented by state revenue. So I like that aspect of it. And then there's another provision in it. I can't remember it off the top of my head exactly what it says, um, but it's about tax breaks for elderly individuals. But like I don't remember that exact text. I don't have it written down right now, so I can't expound on that too much. But it's not, like I said, it's not a completely flawed document, but the amount of things that are kind of included in it makes it it makes it too robust. I think they should have broken it down into more concise sections and maybe done this over time, and they would have had a better shot at getting some of these things changed.
All right, so let me read you what a viewer just wrote.
Okay.
Yeah, it said, Justin, one of the authors of Amendment 2 told me that they were deliberate with the church exemptions.
They were
They
what?
are very deliberate with the church exemptions. There are, quote, churches that own real estate as investment.
Hmm.
Currently that is a tax exempt. The legislators thought that shouldn't be in the amendment, and that the legislature could address it in the future, but it is still protected by statute.
Yeah, and so I I get that. I'm sure there are a lot of circumstances to nonprofits that are taking advantage of that. But what we're running the risk of is grouping everybody together and removing moving the protections, statewide. And kind of with that is, like I said, it affects every nonprofit a little differently. For example, the nonprofit dog rescues that we actually don't own any real estate. So this change doesn't affect our nonprofit because we don't own any property. So there's no reason for us to have that tax exemption. However, in the future, we would like to open up like a community vet care center to be able to offer low cost services and things like that. And the idea behind it is that that vet clinic would generate a revenue that helps pay for some of the other services and maybe some of the more expensive operations procedures and things like that, but also to be able to offer the community support for a lower cost option as opposed to some of the prices that residents usually pay right now. But what happens is if we were to purchase a facility and then we have to pay property tax on top of that, it limits the available resources to actually go towards the goals and objectives of the rescue. And this is kind of a direction that I could see we could potentially get into of you know grouping grouping these things together for kind of like a bad egg kind of thing, and then causing this negative effect on other organizations that are actually doing things correctly.
Okay. I don't have any. I'm looking for other questions. You're getting it all. You're getting a lot of likes, but I
Okay.
don't have any questions. All right.
Yeah, and I
Um,
hope I answered the question.
yeah, I'm looking to see if there's a secondary question or
Okay.
another follow-up. Okay.
Mhm.
All right, good. No, let me open it up, and for those that are on Zoom, go ahead and let's move into open mic and see if there's anybody that would like to go ahead and engage that way.
Mhm.
And if not, let's go ahead and move into closing. This is going to be your last podcast before the election, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So, definitely encourage everybody to, go out and vote this Saturday if you haven't voted already. Kind of like I said, I'm running for councilman in District 4. While this will be my last podcast for this election, I do intend to continue, doing these throughout. You know, whether I'm elected or not, and there's a potential that we may have a runoff election. So we'll kind of continue on this thing, on this direction. And, I definitely want to make everybody feel free to, you could send me some questions that you may have on Facebook, and I'll be glad to, answer them. You can give me a phone call and talk to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have, whether it's live on video, through a text or a phone call.
Wonderful. Good job.
Mhm.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you very much, Justin. I'll let you have the last word. Anything you want to say?
I appreciate everybody's time. I appreciate everybody's consideration for electing me, and I hope we'll have a long-lasting interactive relationship going forward, and as we set up the future for St. George. So thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.